Ever feel like business podcasts are just one big sales pitch? Welcome to the Marketing Thread. I'm your host, Brandon Salisbury, and we've created this show for one simple reason. We love talking about marketing. This isn't a corporate front or a rigid interview series. It's a candid, peer-to-peer conversation with people who are obsessed about what they do. We dive deep into the topics our guests are genuinely passionate about, from the latest tech to old school strategy. Plus, we wrap up every episode by diving into the chaos of the internet with our Ask Reddit segment, answering the most pressing marketing questions that have the community buzzing. If you want a seat at the table for a real conversation between marketers and leaders, you're in the right thread. Pleased to be joined today by Michael Futterman, who is here to give us a little bit different take in the world of marketing, less about marketing strategy and tactics and more about marketing leader development. So Michael, glad to have you with us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and what it's like working with you?
Hey, thanks, Brandon. And I'm thrilled to be on this with you. And I'm excited to talk about all these different questions that you sent me in advance. So a little bit about me. I'm an executive coach. I work with people who are high potentials, first time and experienced leaders who are looking for that next gear. And really what underpins a lot of what I do is this belief in this thing called type 2 fun. And type 2 fun is really, in a nutshell, it's doing hard stuff intentionally, because when you do that stuff intentionally, it makes you more resilient. And it also makes you prepared for the times where you don't have the choice to do hard stuff. So I use things like 360 feedback, helping my clients challenge status quo, and experimenting with new behaviors to help them achieve that next gear. And that's kind of in a nutshell what I do.
Yeah. I love that. I think, resiliency is an underappreciated talent. And it's something that has to be, it's a skill that has to be developed over time and something that can always be strengthened. So I love that approach. Michael, let's dive in here, because I'm really interested in this concept and the work that you do in helping leaders develop and do the hard things to grow. One of the things that I was curious about, just in like talking with you previously and like understanding a little bit more about your approach, I'm curious about a psychological or a leadership concept that you're currently obsessed with that every marketer needs to hear.
Yeah, and I think that it's beyond just every marketer, but certainly in working with a lot of marketers, this comes to mind. There are two things. One of them is this idea of leadership being about meeting people where they are. And then the psychological one is the development of some kind of rubric to evaluate urgency and impact. And so, Brandon, if you don't mind, I can expand a little bit. I can expand a little bit on both of those. So meeting people where they are is more of a strategy that I think leaders and managers can employ. And that really comes from understanding that you can't apply a one size fits all management and leadership approach to the people that report to you. So if marketing leaders and marketing managers can understand that the direct reports that they have all different kinds of things that they bring to the table, right? They have motivations, they've got fears, they've got aspirations, and just really taking the time to work with those people to understand that on a deeper level is one of those things that I'm really obsessed about. The second part around psychology is I think very often we're very reactive. I find that a lot of my clients are very reactive to the number of emails that they get, the client outreach, the manager outreach, and they struggle with understanding how to evaluate urgency. We're in this very fast-paced world, and it's hard sometimes to say, is this the most important thing for me to do right now? So one of the tactics that I ask my clients to do is every time that they get something that elevates their anxiety level, whether it's an email or a request from a manager or even working with a direct report, I ask them to ask themselves, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being, if I don't deal with this immediately, this is going to be a real problem. And a 1 being like the opposite end of that, like nobody would notice it. I find that having rubrics like that can really help my clients evaluate and manage those anxiety provoking things and stressors that come up day to day.
Yeah, I love that. If everything is the most important thing, then nothing is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Right? And everything can't be urgent. One of the other things that I love that you were talking about was just meeting people where they are, right? Like not everyone is motivated by the same thing. Some people are motivated by money, some are motivated by fear, some are motivated by, that next job title. Some just want to be the best at what they do. So there's a variety of different motivations there. And I'm curious to hear how your approach has changed just with like there's so many different generations in the workplace today, and just like coaching leaders on how they're managing the different generations and kind of their approach to work and those motivations.
Yeah, I hear this a lot that people, we've got this new generation, and the main complaint that I hear is they want everything handed to them. I don't necessarily believe that. And then I've got people who are more of those, more around my age, who have been in the business world for a long time, and their expectations are different. So when it comes to getting to meet people where they are, one of the things that I've noticed is that in coaching people who have more international experience outside of the United States, people seem to really value and spend more time outside of the office, getting to know the people that work with them. So in England, there's this what has been described as pub culture, right, where you go out with your manager or your team, and you spend some time at the pub just getting to know one another. And you may talk about business, but you do it in a different environment. Whereas in the United States, it seems to be less of that. So what you end up with are these, happy hours that people go to, but it's not really part of the culture. So what I'm finding is that asking the question of my clients, what can you do to support this new generation? And even though you may not have gone through the same experiences they do, or they are going through, I ask them to really kind of step out of their own experience and say, this is the reality of what you're dealing with. So how do you want to meet these people in the middle? And that takes different forms in the different companies that I've worked with.
Yeah, that's great. Love that approach. So I'd love to hear from you just how you go about coaching leaders to stay confident when best practices that they may have learned 5 years ago are maybe a little outdated, maybe a little obsolete.
Yeah. I think the key skill is this ability and willingness to learn. And that goes back to my belief in that you do hard things because they're good for you. And because you learn how to be resilient. So, things are changing. Just look at like AI and what it has done in the last 18 months for work and business. And so this ability to learn is one of the key things. And then, psychologically, and I've got a background in psychology. I have a master's in organizational psychology. So, I don't put my clients on the couch and ask them to tell me about their mother, but the belief in change, right? A lot of the same philosophies go into the work that we do. So one of the key ones here in helping leaders stay confident is letting go and having more of that beginner mindset. And that can be really challenging for people that, we like predictability as human beings. And when things change and we have to learn a new skill or we have to develop new approaches, that can be challenging. So the other thing that I find with coaching leaders in how to stay confident is that the obstacle is very often, it comes down to challenging the source of rewards that they get from old habits. And so I want to expand on that just a little bit. So the idea is that we do certain behaviors that are inhibiting our growth. And the reason why we do those behaviors is because we get rewarded for them. So an example might be like delegation. If you want to become a much better delegator, it's not hard to list out the things that you ought to do, right? I need to trust people more. I need to be clear in what I want in terms of delegating a task or an activity. I need to provide room for people to struggle and even potentially fail a little bit. Not fail catastrophically, but fail a little bit to learn. So we know these things. We can list them out. When I talk about the rewards for the other behaviors, it's this piece where people say, so instead of delegating, I just do it myself. Why? Because I can get it taken care of quickly and I know it's done the way that I want. I am not clear in the delegation that I provide. I just give them kind of generalities. Why? Because maybe I don't know exactly what it is that I want, or I do know in my head, but I have no rubric or way to share that with people. And what happens is that those behaviors get rewarded. When I do it on my own, I feel like I'm really important. When I don't give really clear guidelines, I don't have to necessarily hold anybody to account for an outcome because it was unclear what the outcome was. And so I get rewarded because I don't have to hold the line on something. And that feels bad to me to try to hold the line on something. So this idea of recognizing that these old habits and these old ways of doing things are actually rewarding to me, and then really examining and saying, okay, what if I were to experiment and say, if I did do a new behavior, maybe I still get rewarded. So it's challenging that status quo of belief. And that's one of the harder things that I do with my clients, but it's also in a lot of ways the most rewarding, because if you can learn that your behavior is still going to be rewarded and you add a new skill to your repertoire, that's incredibly valuable. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is that things change and you have to change along with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's a skill in and of itself to just identify what that reward is, right? Like what do you
Yeah.
stand to gain, by making that change. So, really interesting approach. Really like that. I'm also curious. So, look, marketers are really good at creating persuasion externally. Like that's what we do, right? Like we take a product or a service, and our goal is to persuade you to buy that thing or service. But we're not always great about creating internal influence within our own companies. And so it's a skill that has to be developed over time, particularly stepping into leadership roles where you have influence over the organization and where you've got to work interdepartmentally. So talk me through how you would coach a marketing leader to use their external influence skills to navigate internal politics, and to get that executive buy-in for some of the ideas that they've got.
Yeah. Great question. And everybody's a little different, but there are some core principles that apply here. Number one is, like in marketing, you have to know who your customer or your client is. So understanding the culture, and the behaviors of the people that you're trying to influence, what motivates them, what they might be afraid of, what their pain points are. Those are all really important things for anybody inside an organization, whether you're in marketing or operations or sales, to really understand these other parties so that you can influence them along what is important to them. And so one of the ways that I do that, or one of the pieces of advice that I have for either organizations or individuals, is to really strive to create environments in which getting and giving feedback become more normalized. And that's a big way that I coach my clients to better develop their influencing skills. So as an example, by asking for feedback, and then communicating how you're going to address the feedback that you get in a visible and measurable way, and then actually doing those things, it really helps with predictability and expectations. And again, I think that human beings really thrive on predictability. We want to know what's going to happen next. So by getting a 360 feedback and learning, like, this is what people want more of from me, and then going back to those people and saying, I heard your feedback and here's what I'm going to do about it, and then going and doing it, what you've created there is kind of like the phenomena of if I tell you not to think of a white elephant, And you have a picture of a white elephant in your head. And so what we're doing is we're setting up this prediction that other people have for us. And then we're doing it so that they can say, oh, there it is. He said I told him that I wanted this. And he said he was going to do this. And now he's doing it. So it all lines up. So that creates real influence because people can then be more sure about what they can expect from you. But that all comes from feedback.
Yeah, I love that. Love the thought around just like making yourself a little bit predictable, right? Like you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it, and how that translates into taking on projects or doing things for the company, but also, just in how that translates into creating influence across, other departments and things like that to gain that buy-in. So I really love that. That was great. Um, let's transition now into thinking about how we build. You talked about resiliency when you talked about what you do and how you do it. I see that as a underrated skill, like I said, but it's an underrated skill to also build a team of resilient leaders as well. And so, marketing is a relatively high burnout field, right? We see a lot of turnover, 12 to 18 months in some roles. Some of that is burnout. Some of that is looking for that next thing. And so what would be your advice? Like, what are some of the red flags that you look for in a team that's about to hit a wall? And how would you coach a leader to fix that before it gets to be too late?
Yeah. The red flags piece is kind of different for different people. I think that one of the key things is a red flag for me is this inability to address conflict. So one of the most important things that a leader or a manager can do is being able to set up a culture in which it's okay for people to raise their hand and say, I need help. So I think that is absolutely critical. If you're already at the point of burnout, it's probably too late. Then people need to reset. So I'm really always looking for the precursors to that. And so that ability to raise your hand and say, hey, I need help. The ability to prioritize, like we talked about earlier, and be able to say, what is the risk if we do this? Both from a diversion of our priority standpoint, and also, what is the risk, if we do this to our client base? Asking those questions and being able to evaluate and prioritize. And this comes back to, in a lot of ways, the connection that leaders have with the people that work for them. So that connection and understanding and those check-ins and being able to say, how are you doing? And really get a transparent and honest answer from those people. Those are real hallmarks of teams that are able to weather challenges and weather busy periods. I get it that there are a lot of sprints that are out there. And then the last thing that I want to just focus on is that, effective leadership is about people. And effective management is in a lot more ways about process. And I think that very often we say, well, we can solve this burnout problem, or we can solve this capacity issue with processes. We can become more efficient. We can, use AI. We can use, standard operating procedures. And yes, those things can help. But until the underlying issue of the human element is addressed, I don't know that it solves the overall problem there.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that you talked about was, creating an environment where someone can raise their hand and say, I need help. An environment where people can be a little bit vulnerable and being able to ask how you're doing and get more than a response of, I'm good. That it requires a certain level of trust and psychological safety that needs to exist in a company or even a department for that matter, to be able to reach that level You see a lot of tools out there that like pulse survey tools and things like that to get a gauge on the pulse, but they've tried to circumvent this by making it anonymous to create that safety, which I always found to be funny. Like if you need it to be anonymous, then there's the psychological safety doesn't exist. And so I'm curious about like knowing that it requires a certain amount of trust and psychological safety for that environment. How are you coaching marketing leaders or even other leaders to really like breed that culture?
Yeah. Um, I love that you acknowledge that those anonymous surveys don't necessarily move the needle, because if it were really important for people to hear, shouldn't there be a forum in which people can share the real talk and not be punished for it? And I would say that that's probably the number one thing that I find that I'm coaching leaders on when it comes to this topic is, if you're going to punish somebody for giving you feedback that you asked for, then you've got no business being a leader, right?
Yeah.
Then don't ask for the feedback at all. And so the behaviors are really around working with my clients to help them process the information that they're getting. And some of the ways that I ask them to think about this is, if you're getting both positive and negative feedback, and you only give value to the positive stuff and not the negative stuff, you have to ask yourself the question, like, why? If I'm believing in the positive stuff, I gotta equally believe in the stuff that's being said that's negative.
Yeah.
The other thing that I coach them around is, this is data, and you may choose to believe or agree with the data or disagree with the data. The real question is, this is what people are experiencing. So do you want to take action on this, or do you not? And that is really kind of that core question. Is, you can choose to agree with it or disagree with it, but this is the experience that these other people are having. And so you got to ask yourself, is that what I want to foster? Is that what I want to develop in this organization? So some questions that I ask of my clients are, what do you want to see happen that isn't happening in your organization? And what role do you play in the solution and the cause of that problem? I ask them questions like, well, where could we run an experiment? If this means change, where might we start to look at little movements to test theories and experiment? And sometimes people aren't willing to do that. I had a recent person that I was working with, and it was clear what the challenges were. This is a woman who is actually in marketing, and she was struggling with some new leadership that had come into the organization and feeling sidelined. And we worked on identifying some behaviors and actions that she wasn't currently taking, and that we both agreed that this would be a move in the right direction. It would be a relatively safe experiment for you to do. And her answer to me was, underlying all this is, I don't know that I want to change. I don't know that I want to invest this time and energy, which is totally fine. And I actually said, this is a really good reason for you not to continue working with me as a coach, by the way. It's hard to say that, but it is a truth. Like, there's got to be some belief that there's another way to do things. And if you don't have that underlying belief as a leader, I think it's going to be really challenging to create the environments that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's great. All right, here's a tough one. We've warmed up.
This is a tough one. These other ones haven't been tough.
We're warming up here. I'm curious in your work, if you've encountered a marketing leader who was just like absolutely brilliant in their job, maybe the tactical part of their job, but when it came to being a leader, it was just a total disaster. And if so, like, as you talk to them, how'd you approach that hard conversation of like, hey, like, you are obviously great at what you do, but as a leader, like, it's not going well.
Yeah. I think that, the people that I end up working with, I've certainly worked for people that have been difficult, leaders. And it's very different when you're working for somebody versus when you're coaching them. So, when you're working with somebody, it's about that influence muscle and about seeing things through their eyes and, depending on their personality, raising concerns and raising opportunities in a way that makes sense to them. That's a communication skill. There are a bunch of different ways to go about doing that. When it comes to coaching, when I find those people, as long as they are willing to be coached, and sometimes I'm brought in as a person that's kind of like a fix it. And sometimes I'm brought in as we've got a really high performer and here's the opportunity, to upskill them. What I find is that we have to find the motivation, for them to change, and helping them recognize that this is a new skill set and you might have been really good at what you did. But if you want to be successful going forward, let's look at some role models. Let's look at some small wins that you want to accomplish, and stepping them through that and winning them over with some of those small wins, is often, the way that I get under the hood. And then all the other stuff that we've talked about, I find no better tool than getting feedback from others, is super valuable. And the way that I do that is I collect that data, and make it all attributable. So, Brandon, if you were going to be a person that I was interviewing for, let's just say Jane's 360 interview, I'm going to go back to Jane and say, here's all the things that Brandon said, and then work through with Jane her reaction, if there is one, and come up with those ideas about what she may or may not want to do in terms of addressing that feedback. I find really no better tool than the words of the people that they work with, that motivates people to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Particularly so I've worked in startups for the majority of my career, and the thing that I've always struggled with in startups is, that as you progress in title, your peer group gets smaller, right? And so, in a startup, the first startup I was in, head of sales and marketing, there was no other marketing leader above me. There was no one to learn from. And so as you know, I've had to look for different ways to enhance my leadership skills and understand what that next role looks like long before I got there. But I've had to look outside the organization. And so, you talk about like, hey, like you're really great at what you do, but the leadership skills aren't there. How much, in your opinion, of that should be thought of well before you get into that role, and how do you coach someone on developing those skill sets for the next role that they might be looking to take on?
Oh, that one is, interesting. So I've been part of learning and development organizations for a long time internally to larger companies that had really well established management and leadership training. I think, coaching, obviously, right? I'll put a plug in for that. I think that there's a really great opportunity there for people to upskill by, having a guide. Not every organization has the resources to do that. So finding people that can serve as informal mentors or even formal mentors, joining, groups. There are professional groups like Vistage and YPO for startups, and then there are others. There's one that's specifically designed for women called Chief. That I think that those are great forums in which you can, learn from other people who have been in that position. But it's really, again, just dedicating yourself to, building that skill. So the classic challenge is that people are really good at their job and then they get promoted into a position where they have to manage others. And it's a totally different skill set. You have to learn. There are very few people that come to that role with all the skills and capabilities that they need. So what people do is they wing it. They think that if they were good enough to be promoted, so they got to be good at this part too. So really recognizing it's a new and a different skill. And it's often both, it's a skill development, but then there's also the psychological shift from what they were rewarded for in the past. And that goes back to that reward system, right? If I get rewarded psychologically for solving the problem on my own or doing it on my own, why would I stop doing that? That's a really powerful reward, right? It's internal, some of the most powerful reward systems that we have, rather than some sort of external reward, which is I got more money, which is valuable, but very often short lasting in terms of its influence. But if I get a feeling of importance and satisfaction from solving a problem, why would I stop doing it? So using that awareness to say, okay, how do I still get rewarded, but change the behavior? That's work that gets done through coaching. That's work that gets done through reinforcement from your manager. That's work that gets done through reinforcement from the people that work for you. It's finding the same reward, but through different channels.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, big fan of coaching. One of the things that I did when I recognized like, hey, like I'm ready for more, like I'm ready for that next challenge. I did two things. One, I created a mutual action plan with my boss, who my leader, and we looked at like, all right, what are the characteristics that need to be developed to be ready for this role? And then I partnered with a coach. My coach was Kyle Lacey. He was the CEO with Lessonly, eventually Jellyfish, and so on. And it was just somebody who's been there, somebody who sees what I haven't been able to see yet. They can provide that perspective. And he was really good at challenging me, not just on like, hey, here, like, what do you really want to do? Like, what does next look like? Is this really where you want to be, or do you really want to be over here? But then also just providing that context and that around the corner thinking of like, have you thought about this, and how this is how your management style may need to change because now you have influence over this area. This is how your thinking might need to change in these meetings that you sit in or perspectives that you give. So having a coach that has been there and having a coach that has that perspective and can challenge your thinking and can help you to think at that higher level is incredibly valuable. So plus one to everything you said there. All right. So Michael, it's time to jump in. This is our favorite segment here on the marketing thread. It's called Ask Reddit. This is how we got our name. We scour the interwebs of Reddit to find the most pressing and relevant topics to our conversation. And I came up with a couple here for you that I think you'll be well positioned to answer. The first one is from Reddit. It says, my CEO just asked for a viral strategy by Monday. Every marketer loves to be asked for a viral strategy. I'm burnt out and my team is ready to quit. How do I manage up without getting fired?
My first question is this a pattern or is it a one-off? If it's a pattern of behavior, it might require, I would say that it requires, a bigger conversation. And the not getting fired piece is a real motivator. I get that. So ideally you're in an environment where you can articulate what the priorities are on your plate, and how this might disrupt the deliveries of those other priorities that you might have. But really, either way, I think that it's the approach that I recommend or that I would coach people towards is clarifying what's needed by Monday. And is this a full plan, or are you looking for steps in the right direction? Very often what I find is that people throw out these ideas but they're not clear on what that next step is. So using some sort of rubric that says, well, I can get this to you by this date. Would that be satisfactory? I think that very often that raises awareness of what is possible rather than what is wanted.
Yeah, I love that. And going back to something you said earlier in the episode where you talked about establishing urgency, like, is this a 10? Is this a 1? Like, where does it
Yes.
fall in that urgency?
Yeah.
And, one thing I found to be effective is to say, like, just like you said, like, here are the things and that I've got to get done, and here are the due dates that they need to be done by. Like, where does this stack in the priorities that I've got? And what are we willing to kick off the plate so that we can make room for this?
Yeah.
And like you said, just providing a realistic time frame of, like, if we're not going to kick anything off, here's a realistic time frame for when we might be able to have this ready, just to help to set some expectations there. So love that.
Yeah.
All right, here's the next one. I've been a doer in quotations for 10 years. I just got promoted to VP and I have no idea how to lead people. How do I lean in when I feel like a fraud?
Yeah. Hire a coach. That's the easy answer. Or go do some training somewhere, right? So, the American Management Association has programs on leadership and management. You could go to depending on how large your organization is, you might even go to your HR department and say, do you have a job description? Sometimes people get promoted without job descriptions. So I think getting clarity around what the expectations are of you in this new role, what the deliverables are, asking questions like, if this is my deliverable, how will you know? What will you be able to point to know that that's happening? I think all of those things, educating and upskilling yourself is maybe step one. Asking yourself, who are the people that you admire or that you've worked with or for that were good leaders? What did they do? And what did they not do? I ask part of my working with people, I'm always asking them, like, who are the most influential leaders? And very often people start by saying, these are people that I try to not emulate. These are the people that I want to avoid being like. And I find that's very telling. So thinking that through, I take people through a values exercise. How do you want to show up as a leader? And what would be the evidence of that behavior for you can be really valuable. And then going back to experiencing all of this with a beginner mindset. Look, not everybody gets the opportunity to move from being a doer to being a manager, but everybody who does do that is doing it for the first time. And so how can you allow yourself some grace and period of learning? You're not going to be a 10 out of 10 right out of the box. You'll have some learning steps to take, and that's okay. And then, the last bit that I advise people on here is creating what I would describe as scaffolding. And what that means is using your direct reports and your manager to create that scaffolding that'll help guide you. And what I mean by scaffolding is, what are you looking for? How will you know that this is happening? Talking to your direct reports, like, what are the most important things that you need from me? As your manager. And it doesn't mean that you have to do everything that they say, but at least what you're doing is getting an articulation of what they expect. And that, again, goes back to predictability. So those are the ways that I approach that process with people that are entering those roles for the first time.
Yeah. Love that. I remember, and this is going to date me a little bit, but I think the gray hair already does that. Going back to when, Facebook had only been out for a few years. I remember seeing a job post. I think Facebook had been out maybe 7 or 8 years. And I remember seeing a job post that for a social media manager that required 15 years of experience. I'm like, well, how do you do that when it's been around, half that? And I remember having this conversation with a good friend of mine. We laughed about it because, sometimes job descriptions are just, like, completely unrealistic.
Yeah.
But, we as first time leaders, sometimes we expect that from ourselves, when we might laugh about it if we were to see that on a job description like that. We expect ourselves to be that seasoned and that tenured leader, when really we need to just be real with ourselves about, drawing the confidence from, obviously, like, something was seen in me to show that I'm right for this role, But I still have a lot of learning to do, and being humble enough to accept that and know that there's plenty more to develop. And maintaining, I think maintaining that humility, no matter how long you've been a leader, because like you said, there's always another way to do things, and there's always a new way or a new approach that you can learn. So, Michael, appreciate you being on the show. I've learned a lot just from having this conversation with you, and have appreciated the different insights that you've been able to provide around, how marketers become great leaders. If somebody has follow-ups for you or wants to engage with you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, great question. You can find me on LinkedIn, right? Michael Futterman on LinkedIn, and I've got my profile up there. Another way to do it is to go to my website. It's michaelfutterman.com. And there's a place for you to book a free coaching session. And yeah, I'd love to hear from any of your audience.
Great. Michael, we'll include both of those in the description, so if anyone's interested, they'll know exactly how to get in touch with you. So, all right, Michael. So again, appreciate you having. For everyone that's joined us, thanks for joining. If you're looking if you're looking to grow the person behind the professional, you're in the right thread, and we'll see you next time.